Well, hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. It is another beautiful, sunny, great day to be alive, and I am so happy to be sharing the next little bit of time with all of you. Today's topic is one that I really care about a lot, and it's a really important one too. The topic is how to deal with setbacks. So I wanted to do this topic because at any given moment in life, you never know who is dealing with what behind the scenes. And even though I think life is really arbitrary, it's arbitrarily cruel, it's arbitrarily unjust and unfair, one thing that is pretty much guaranteed is that no one just kind of gallops from the start to finish with zero setbacks. In some way, shape, or form, we all deal with setbacks in life. Sometimes we deal with huge setbacks on the scale of illnesses, of grief and loss. Sometimes it's monetary loss, sometimes it's the loss of people we love, sometimes it's the loss of things we built or places we lived, and sometimes it's smaller setbacks, but they still feel really hurtful. It could be the end of a friendship, it could be a disappointing outcome with something at work, it could be not getting a specific job or opportunity to work, or it could be a financial setback. What is guaranteed is that there are going to be speed bumps in this game of life, and all of us have to have skills in order to deal with those setbacks. What I think will set you apart and make you more capable of dealing with whatever cards you're dealt in the game of life is your ability to develop one very, very important muscle. And that muscle is resilience. That is the ability to get back on your feet and start again when you face a setback. So that's what we're going to be talking about in today's video. Now, I mentioned that life is arbitrary, it's cruel, it's unfair, and different people are dealing with all sorts of different setbacks. I'm going to be sharing with you the kinds of tips that have helped me throughout my life, because I think these are actually the skills that are far more important than anything you could learn in a book, than anything you could study at college, than anything you could Google on YouTube. They're skills of mental resilience. They're skills that involve having such a grasp on your thoughts, your emotions, your reactions to things, and they're very sophisticated skills. And they only grow when you start actively and deliberately using them, just like the muscles in your body, and training yourself on how to be mentally fit and strong. What I want to start by saying is that this video does not emphasize spending a lot of time focusing on the cause of a setback. One of the places where a lot of us waste a lot of energy is on the woulda, coulda, shoulda game. And it's a game that I think is a bit futile. Setbacks are going to happen no matter what. Sometimes they will be your fault. But equally, many times setbacks happen and they have nothing to do with you. And what I think is that the skills that you need to know how to effectively manage setbacks, those skills are the same regardless of whose fault the setback was or what the absolute cause of the setback is. So I'm not saying it's never worth it to go and figure out why something happened, but this video is focused on how we can deal with the mountain that is now in front of us. Okay, with all that said, let's dive in. So I took a few notes for myself just because I wanted to, again, just keep track of some of the things I found myself doing very regularly. And of course, one of the first things that I noticed was that when I have setbacks, sorry, I'm like tangled up in some shrubbery right now, and I just became aware of it as I was moving. So, one of the things that I think is really important when you're facing a setback is to pause and figure out what your emotional profile is. As human beings, we have a lot of things going on in our bodies that make us these higher beings of consciousness. And the fact is that we have a lot of thoughts that are running through our minds that we're basically listening to all day long. And then we have a lot of emotions that are pulsing through our bodies. And if we're not aware of what our thoughts are and what our emotions are, we're very susceptible to just being gripped by our thoughts and emotions, kind of like they're a current in an ocean that takes a grip on our body. And without that awareness, we can't really contend with them in a healthy way and figure out whether those emotions and thoughts are logical and healthy responses and worth listening to, or whether they are a bit intrusive and exaggerated and reactionary and emboldened, and whether they need to be tamed a little bit. So I think the first thing to do in any situation in which you are facing a big setback is to pause and figure out, where am I right now? And when you do that, you'll notice that usually setbacks bring a lot of negative thoughts and emotions with them. On the emotional front, you're likely to be feeling a lot of things like maybe some self-hatred, maybe some disappointment, grief at the thing that didn't work out as you expected. So sadness, frustration, anger. These are all emotions that may be very, very logically flowing from the setback. And what I find is often helpful when I'm noticing that these negative emotions are coming up is to figure out whether these emotions really need to be stoked. So I often think of these emotions that start coming into my body kind of like these little fires that are kind of embers at the moment. And if I can be calm enough to just let the embers fade as the oxygen runs out naturally, then I can get to the other side of that emotional experience quicker and less painfully. But if I'm not aware of what my emotions are, or I'm not making an effort to control them or manage them, I can actually end up throwing logs into these fires and letting them become huge, destructive infernos that they really didn't need to be. So I am never going to be someone who says compartmentalize every emotion you feel, because I think emotions are really healthy. I think they tell us something at a subconscious level, at a human level, and they're kind of what make us such a unique species. But they can also be these deceptive forces that can be, they can be taken out of context, and they can be managed in a way that lets them become far more powerful and encroaching than they need to be. So I think it's important to use your emotions as clues about what's going on in your body and why are you having such an emotional reaction. I think they're worth listening to. I think that oftentimes you just need to surrender to certain emotions. You know, if you're facing a real loss of a person or of a life vision that you had, it's natural that you're going to have some sadness and some grief. And if you feel that you made a mistake, it's natural that you might feel some remorse and some atoning. But let those emotions be what they need to be, and nothing more or less than that. So I think compartmentalizing and stifling your emotions entirely is probably not the best way to deal with them, because if they never get a chance to be acknowledged, then there might be something unresolved that lives within you. But if they get so much showtime that they become the protagonist of your mind and of your heart and of your life, then you're ceding your sovereignty as a soul to this impulse that comes through you. And you'll feel very powerless if you're just allowing your emotions to control your life and your happiness far more than they needed to. So, again, first thing to do is just dissect. Figure out what your emotional profile is, and sort of do the same thing with your mind. Your mind is often going to have self-talk going on, because we have self-talk going on all day long, that is very much related to your emotional hygiene and your emotional health. So if you're somebody who doesn't have a good relationship with yourself and your emotions, your self-talk is likely going to be very impassioned and negative. Whereas if you're somebody who has a healthier relationship with yourself and your emotions, then your self-talk can be a lot more manageable and a lot more healthy. Now, at the end of the day, self-talk is an interesting thing in and of itself, because it's malleable. And it really is something that can be deceptive and can be shaped by how you're managing your mind and your body in other situations. So again, if you're noticing that you have a lot of negative self-talk, take that as a clue that there are some unresolved emotions that you need to contend with. And if your self-talk is pretty healthy, but you still have all these negative emotions, then at least you know you're in a place where you know what you're expecting, and now you just have to kind of write it out, you know? It's kind of like knowing you have a final exam that you're not looking forward to taking, but you know that you have a strategy for getting through it, and you'll get through it. So, with that said, how do we get through it? How do we buckle up and get through the roller coaster of uncomfortable emotions that we may have to deal with during a setback? The first thing I've learned to do to cope with complicated emotions, and it's something that I've used since I was 10 years old and since my parents got divorced even earlier than that, is exercise. And I know this one sounds really basic, and I know it also might sound like a very sort of small answer to things that can feel so grave and so big. When you're dealing with a huge illness or you're dealing with a huge loss, it may seem like, yeah, like what are a couple endorphins going to do? Like, this is a loss of structural magnitude. But I actually think that exercise is a key way of, again, doing what is most important to do to build resilience. And that is to not let your emotions overtake all your body functions. So when you have really, really strong emotions, they're very hard things to just control by closing your eyes, because you can't really always have an on-off button. You can't always have an on-off button. So often, the way that we control these metaphysical emotions, I think, is through physical things that we do. So I often find that if my emotions are really out of control, staying in the same place and thinking the same things are not going to interrupt those sort of neurochemical pathways. I need to disrupt those pathways. And I find that changing your venue and getting your mind to force itself to be on something else. And sports and physical fitness often have this mind-body connection that really helps. That this is the way to start breaking those neurochemical reactions and start forcing your mind not to be in loops of negative emotions. So, even though you may feel, because of your emotions, that the last thing you want to do is laugh and get out of breath and run and put further distress on your body, even doing some of the simpler exercises, taking a walk outside, taking a walk by nature, taking a bike ride, doing a yoga class, doing a game maybe with some ball sports where you're focused on points and angles, even if you're not doing it well. Doing anything that can get your mind-body connection going, and if it's rigorous enough, that can get a few endorphins going, is going to change your emotional state. And again, this may just be a short-term fix to a long-term problem, but if you know that this works in the short term and you do it frequently and it becomes something that you have a habit of doing, you're going to find that you're going to handle long-term difficulties much better because you have a short-term coping mechanism that you can do regularly and repeatedly. And so you have this tool and this hygiene kit that you can just rely on. And if you rely on it frequently, now it is actually part of your long-term coping mechanism. So get some exercise in and do what feels good to you in that moment. Some people really love being surrounded by other people and by friends and having socializing and conversations. And sometimes you may just want to clear your head and be alone and be with yourself and be with the natural world or be amongst strangers who aren't really talking. And all of those are okay. I think there's different venues and different modalities that are going to suit different occasions. But really take a moment and figure out what you think is going to serve you the best. And then try to get that movement in. Because I think that the energy of movement is positive and it will change your emotional state. Even something as simple as a walk. And if nothing else, you can always come back to your breath and closing your eyes and physiologically slowing your body down through breath work. But I think the more you get that breath work towards also engaging your cardiovascular system and your lymphatic system and your musculoskeletal system, the more you're going to really disrupt the emotional paradigm that your mind is set in and start disrupting it and getting it back to a more positive place. Like I said, you'll probably still have these lingering emotions that are the natural byproduct of your setback. But our goal is to have these lingering emotions be these small fires that we are not actively stoking. We want them to just run their course. Maybe they're in the background, still burning a little bit, but now you have a different emotion in the foreground and you're allowing yourself to smile and converse with people. And so that fire that's in the background is slowly going to run out of oxygen on its own time, and it's going to pass through your system. And that's what we're trying to do. So first thing I recommend is figure out your emotional figure out the dissection. Where are you? And then figure out how you can interrupt it. Because you kind of know that it's a fire that is very susceptible to growing larger. And all it requires is for you to get tempted and want to, blow it out of proportion. And, sometimes the things that make these fires grow bigger are things that we think will be healthy, like venting and repeating the stories and replaying the events and, doing, like I said, the analysis, the causation analysis. But oftentimes all these things do is allow these fires to grow bigger and bigger. And I think resilience is about not letting those fires get any bigger than they need to get. So giving them their due respect, but not letting them get bigger than they need to get. And so it may sound counterintuitive, but sometimes the best thing to do is, not overly dissect the situation that caused the setback. Not overly play the blame game, whether it's blaming other people, other contexts, or yourself. Because even if you could perfectly pinpoint the blame for something, and oftentimes you can't, it doesn't help you build that muscle of learning how to manage those fires, which are the uncomfortable emotions. And you just want to learn how to manage them so that they can have that minimally disruptive effect. So get that exercise in, force yourself. And I'm not a fan of forcing yourself to do a lot of things you don't want to do. I often think we, in our American culture, like force ourselves to do things, and we call it hustling, and we appreciate go-getters. And I often preach that, sometimes when your body wants rest, you should just give it rest. And sometimes when you need affection, just get affection. You don't always have to power through everything. But we're talking about a very specific situation where you are concerned that your emotions may get too strong and take hold of you, and there's that very high risk, and we're talking about mitigating that risk very deliberately. Okay, so that's my first tip for dealing with setbacks, is have a good energy and physiologically driven movement system, something that you can go to, that you enjoy, that you can power through even when you're not at your highest energy and highest mood. And if you have something that you particularly like, whether it's a sport like tennis or golf, or a place in nature that you like, or an activity like dance, leaning into those could be even better. And when you couple that with people that you enjoy or places that you like, I think you're really setting yourself up for a higher likelihood of getting some success. So this is a good segue to my second point, which is that I mentioned how some people are social and they enjoy exercising with people, and some people are more solitary. But the point that I was getting at, which is the second thing, is find people who unconditionally love you. Find people who unconditionally love you. Sometimes when I'm really emotional and I feel very disappointed or upset, I want to just crawl into a quiet space all alone and just bask in my disappointment. And I don't always think this is the healthiest way to deal with setbacks. Because again, when you go all alone and you're just by yourself, you are at a very high risk of getting into a place of self-anguish and self-hatred and self-deprecation. And it's because we are so much harsher on ourselves than other people are on us that we allow ourselves to do this. And again, looking at this at a logical level, like I said, it often doesn't matter whose fault it was. It doesn't matter whether it's your fault that, you had a car accident or didn't get a job, or whether it was pure arbitrary luck, that someone else already had a candidate they wanted for that position, or someone else caused the car accident. 100%. It doesn't matter, because the point is you're now at the circumstance where you have a bit of a loss and you're trying to regain your grounding. And so being alone is a very easy way to get into mind loops and to get into self-criticism, and for people like me who are incredibly self-critical, what often happens is you then start conditioning your love for yourself on your success or likelihood of having gotten into this conundrum that could have just as well been arbitrary. And so I think it's really important to spend time with people who love you unconditionally. And that's going to remind you that whatever setback you're facing, health, job, financial, whatever it is, the people who really love you are still going to love you the same. I'm going to say that again. The people who really love you are still going to love you just the same. Because the real people who love you unconditionally. They love you because of who you are and who you are to them. Period. That's it. It's who you are as a soul floating on this planet with your own chemistry and biochemistry, with your own temperament and personality and also what you bring to their life, whether you're a family member, someone who's seen the world through similar lenses to them, and who they have, a kith and kin relationship with, or it's a really good friend, whatever it is. The love that the people who have, the unconditional love that people have for you will remind you that your setback is just that. It is a setback. It is tripping on a twig when you were taking a hike. It is the speed bump you didn't know was coming. But it is not the thing that's going to define you. It's not going to define you to the people who love you, and you shouldn't let it define you to yourself. So even those setbacks often invite a lot of self-criticism and can often invite self-deprecation and anguish and self-hatred if you're really harsh on yourself. It's really important, even if you think you want to be antisocial, to force yourself to get into the company of people who love you unconditionally. And to remember that in life, in the game of life, where there really is no rubric for who won life, there aren't going to be trophies and pedestals. It's not going to be like that. It's just going to be you getting to the end of your life and having to kind of self-assess whether it was a rich, well-lived life. And there's so many ways to get that. There's unlimited ways, in fact, to get that. And most people, when they actually get really old and when they die, they realize that the human connections and the human relationships that they forged were the real currency in life. Not the money, not the successes, not the material things, but the rich human connections. And so, get yourself back into that space so that you can see just how much currency you have in the game of life. And that's going to help, again, mitigate the self-destructive damage that we are so susceptible to when we're facing a setback. Okay, so that takes us to number 3. The third tip I have for you in this video of dealing with setbacks is again related to bolstering your self-appreciation and your self-value. And that is to remember everything that you have accomplished so far. This isn't always easy to do because when you're facing a setback, that setback becomes this disproportionately big elephant and boogeyman in your panorama, and you don't have a reality check of how big that little loss is in the grand scheme of things and just how much you've done so far. And in order to see that when it's not self-evident, you often have to, again, do these things that are very intentional things. These aren't things that happen very easily. You kind of have to dig into your toolbox to do these things when you have setbacks. But one of the ways you can remember the things you accomplished so far is to just look back in time. Look back in time. Pick a time, whether it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago, when you were a child, and try to remember where you were at that phase of life and what you were facing and what you didn't even know you had yet to face and what things you've overcome already, because dealing with other hardships, dealing with other setbacks, that is also something you should be proud of. The fact that maybe you thought you were amazing at something or just amazing overall when you were younger, but you didn't know life was going to throw all these hardships at you. And now you're somebody who can stand proud knowing that you've cultivated so much resilience already. But I often find when I'm needing to remember my accomplishments that I've done so far, a couple of things help. One is to literally pull out photos from the past, from other stages of your life, and really reflect on where you were at that time. I've not been journaling for many years now, but when I was young, I kept a few journals. And even just going back and reading journal entries of a teenager who couldn't figure out how to, eat normally and was dealing with an eating disorder, or someone who didn't even have her college degree yet, let alone her professional degree, let alone her first job. It reminds you of where you were in these phases of life when you were so uncertain and you had so much in front of you, and the fact that you've gotten through all those hurdles so far, all the different educational milestones, all the different professional milestones, even if you've done things like just moving from one location to another, or setting up your first house, or, managing different friendships and relationships that have endured for different years, or becoming a better sibling or a better friend. These are all skills that you've garnered over time and achievements that you've made. And sometimes the best way to remember what all you've done is to literally just get a reminder of where you were at another moment in your life many years before, and all the things that you hadn't even thought you would be able to see. And I find that those are really helpful. Those are really, really, really helpful. So if you have old journals, go to those old journals. If you have photos, look at those photographs. Look at yourself as a kid who had no idea what was going to be happening in your life. And the fact that all the crazy things that happened in your life from when you were a kid happened, and you got through them, and you found ways to get through them. And then the two other things I often do when I need to remember everything I've done so far is I often reach out and try to find people who are kind of following my path in some way, who are further behind than I am and need help or are looking for advice. And I really find that when I talk to, for example, law students or really young lawyers who want to do things that I've already done, when I'm able to give them useful advice and see that they are grateful for it and it's helpful to them, that often reminds me again that I've done so much and I have so much to give, and that even if I didn't achieve one particular goal that I set my mind on, that it's okay. That doesn't take away from everything else that I've done, and that I've done a lot already, and I should be proud of what I've done, not disappointed in one of the infinite different paths that I didn't get to take to prove what else I could do. And then finally, this one's again a more active sort of step. But again, all of these are pretty active. Again, I just think that we have to do active steps when we're dealing with very powerful emotions and very difficult circumstances. One more thing that I think is really helpful for remembering how far you've come is to actually write it out. And I mean this like, say you were asking a teacher or professional person for a reference letter of some sort. Well, I've done this many times, and I remember a couple years ago was the first time that one of my professional references was like, I'll write you a letter, but can you draft it? And I'll edit it, and then we'll submit it. And so I remember that I did this, and it's just funny, I'm having like a flashback as we talk about it. I remember the first time I did it, it brought me to tears. It brought me to tears because I realized that the job of a lawyer, for example, is to advocate for other people, to take their strengths and their weaknesses and create a compelling story, a reason for why they're still amazing, or their case is the better case, or their position is the better position. And we very rarely have to do it for ourselves. But one thing I've learned from being a lawyer is that there's no such thing as like the perfect case where your client has all the good facts and everything is perfect, and the other side has all the bad facts and everything is imperfect. No, it's never like that. Basically, what happens in like any lawsuit is that each side on a dispute has good and bad facts that they have to work with. And the art of persuasion is weaving together the best that you have and creating a compelling argument for why a certain position makes sense based on the best facts that you can muster. And that's kind of what you have to learn how to do for yourself. You have to realize that everyone's got their different insecurities, their different weaknesses, their different, their weakest links, but everyone also has their strengths and the things that make them unique and the things that they can bring to the table. And so it's really helpful to learn how to play to your strengths and advocate and weave together a compelling narrative of why there is a strong case for you, why you're still an amazing person, an amazing employee, an amazing sibling, an amazing friend. And I know that we're in a culture where people don't like to write as much, they don't like to journal as much. I'm doing this really long talk and I don't even expect people to listen to much of it, but I like long form, and I think that's where real substance is. And so I insist on doing long form videos sprinkled with short ones. But if you can take the time to do it, it will pay dividends, and then you have that record, and you can actually go back to that record as often as you want. So it's funny because now I often try and ask people who are writing letters of references for me if I can give them some bullet points or some anecdotes or some examples to include, or do a first draft, because I think that the act of you having to self-reflect, knowing all the details that you know about what you've done, is really important. And sometimes it's so easy to forget the nitty-gritty details. Like if I don't write memos of some of my cases when I'm transferring them to other people, or like summaries of my trials for a supervisor, the funny thing is if I didn't write those down, I would totally forget. You just remember the end result, and all the details along the way of how you contended with different obstacles kind of can just get lost in yesteryear's memories. And so I really find that like taking pen to paper and summarizing things as they happen, both in real time or as a retrospective, is really, really important. So my third tip was to remember everything you've done so far. And within that, I gave you 3 specific ways you can try to do it. 1 is by looking at old photos and records of yourself and really trying to remember where you were at previous moments of your life. 2 is to talk to people who aren't as far along as you are, and to realize how far along you are by the fact that you're able to help people who aren't there yet. And 3 is to actually write it out. Write a letter of recommendation endorsing yourself for the thing you want, and whether it's a love letter talking about how great you are, whether it's a work, professional type letter, write it and make a case for yourself in writing on paper with all the details you can think of. And you'll see that it's not just profound, but as you write, more and more things will come to your mind. So use that magnetic power of the brain to its full advantage. Okay, now let's go to my 4th tip for dealing with setbacks. Okay. So I have 1, 2, 3 more points. I'm trying to think of the best order to bring them up in. So I think I'll flip the order of what I've written in my notes, but I'm going to start with gratitude. I'm doing this because I think gratitude is a nice segue from the point we were just talking about, which was about remembering everything you've done so far. When you're remembering everything you've done so far, another thing that it's important to do is to remember how fortunate you still are. Remember how fortunate you still are. There are billions of people on this planet, and there are many people who still have it worse than you. If you are always comparing yourself either to the idealized, perfect version of yourself that only exists in the human imagination and isn't a real person, or you're comparing yourself to other people, or your perception of other people that may not even be accurate, you're going to find yourself constantly feeling disappointed. But when you compare yourself to people who are less fortunate than you will realize you have so much to be thankful for. If you're facing a physical disability, temporarily or long-term, think about people who have even worse disabilities, ones that are more painful, or amputations, or people who are in their countries who might be in conflict zones. If you think you've lost something financial, think about how many people probably live in far worse circumstances than you. There are so many people we don't even think about who are on this planet who, by no choice of their own, were born into terrible circumstances, far worse than probably ones that you have. And yet we forget. We forget that there are people born into dire poverty. We forget that there are people born to parents who are addicts, or who are violent, or who are no longer on the planet and able to offer comfort or a guiding hand. There are people with all sorts of illnesses and diseases. There are people with all sorts of financial setbacks every day. People lose their homes. People lose their businesses. People lose so much. And I'm not encouraging you to, kind of engage in a comparison of trauma. This isn't a trauma competition that I want people to engage in. It's just something to put your life into perspective. And whenever you're complaining about something, it's just so tempting to let your ego enjoy that complaint. And it's the same exact thing that we were talking about before. It's so easy to let that envy and that disappointment, that jealousy, those emotions, to fuel them, and put more logs in those fires. But those are also emotions that probably will pass quicker and be less destructive if instead of putting more fuel in the fire and engaging in further comparison with idealized comparables, if you just focus on what all you have to be grateful for, what so many people don't have. And I'm sure you can think of something. If you have some good family support, if you have good friends, if you have good food to eat, if you have the ability to be educated, if you have the ability to use your whole body, if you have the ability to have a nice roof over your head, if you're born into a country where you're not feeling constantly persecuted. I'm just giving different examples, but there's stuff that you can think of. And like I said, life is arbitrary, cruel, and unfair. I'm not minimizing that. So there will be people who have it better than you for literally no reason that can be explained logically. But there are people who also have it worse. And so that two-sided coin has two sides. And by focusing on the fact that there are people who have it worse and you could have had it worse, you're going to, again, build your ability to be resilient and not ruminate on the jealousy and the greed and the negative emotions that come from a setback, and to just accept it in stride, keep those negative emotions under control, and let those fires fade out quicker. Okay, my last 2 points for this video. So most of the things that we've talked about so far, and sorry I keep moving around, I'm kind of sitting in shrubbery and just trying to move a little bit because this video is so long and my legs are starting to get numb. So my 5th point of how you can deal with setbacks is now, at this later stage, figure out what you still can do and what you still have control over. So I don't want you guys to do this early, like too early. Like when you first have the setback, like I said, it's very important to pause. It's very important to pause. In a world that's moving so fast all the time, I think we undervalue the benefit and importance of just pausing. The pause needs to happen first so that you can get that dissection, that cross-section of where am I right now? What am I feeling? Why am I feeling these things? Am I capable of controlling these feelings? Why do I feel like they're going to take so much control on me? What work have I not done that would allow me to control these situations. Do your pause, do your dissection first, and try to get control on your emotional and mental state using all the techniques I mentioned so far. And then, this is more of the long-term coping with the setback, is figure out what you still have control over. This is always a good thing to do, and again, I just think it's important to do it in a particular order. So, we often take blame for things we didn't have control over. We often blame people for things they didn't have control over. And equally silly is that sometimes we don't even focus on the things we do have control over. So once you've kind of stabilized and you're not in a chaotic, emotional whirlwind, that is the time to very logically and very calmly figure out, okay, I had this setback. What do I still want? What do I still want professionally, personally, or out of life? And so this kind of relates to my video about goals. And if you haven't watched that one, I really encourage you to watch it. It's one of my all-time favorite videos. It is a very long one, but I do think it's very worthwhile if you have a longer period of time. In that video, I talk a lot about how often we set short-term goals that we harp on when we achieve or don't achieve them. But really those goals they're just tools we're using towards trying to achieve some larger desires that are living within us. And if we can figure out what the larger desires are and whether they are valid, then we can figure out whether those small goals are really that important. For example, if your larger goal in life is to have agency and independence professionally, and you want to have your own business, or you just want to have autonomy on your time, there's an infinite number of ways you can get there. So if you have a setback and you don't get one job that you thought was the perfect, all remote, perfect job that was going to give you the agency you wanted right now, you might be super disappointed. But actually, there are many other ways you can get what you wanted. And so you need to focus on what you still can do, what options are still available to you that will help you get the larger end that you were seeking, and that a small goal was the means for. Similarly, if your larger goal is companionship and the feeling of being wanted and having affection in your life and having a person or people you think care about you, whether a significant other or a group of true friends, if you lose a friendship or you lose a relationship, that's going to hurt. That's a loss. But after some time, you figure out, okay, I didn't really need that person. What I actually was craving was loyal, authentic, sincere friendship. Loyal, authentic, sincere companionship. So what is in my control right now, at this moment in my life, that might take me closer towards getting that actual end goal? And you can do this with jobs, whether it's because you wanted to be in a certain place, earn a certain amount of money, have a certain amount of prestige, have people think you were smart, whatever it was. There was a reason you wanted the small goal. Focus on the reason, the big picture reason why you wanted it, and figure out what other routes will get you there. In most things in life, there really are multiple routes to the real goal that you want. And I think this is because most human beings fundamentally want the same things. They want self-validation, self-love, a genuine sense of feeling like they belong, a sense of being needed, a sense of being independent, industrious, useful. There are so many ways to get the real things that you need, that if you can just really think about what those feelings are that you've been wanting subconsciously, then you can figure out how else might I be able to get there. And that's really where the magic lies, because that's where you want to be directing your energy. instead of spending all your energy blaming, dissecting, getting to the root cause of a setback, just think of the setback as that road bump you weren't expecting, but your car can still drive you to your destination. Unless that road bump has caused your entire car to go up in flames, which I have not yet seen a road bump do, your car can still get you to your destination. It might be a little bit slower. It might be a longer route. It might not even be the route you thought, but your car can still get there. So once you've focused on getting your serenity, getting calm, and getting past the initial wave of emotions and getting control on your being, then with a clear mind, think about what was the real goal that I wanted. And don't just find another route to get there. Make sure you still believe in that goal. Again, go see my Selecting the Right Goals video. You might realize during a setback that maybe that setback was a sign. Maybe that setback was a sign from the universe that you had started pursuing the wrong goal, and that the thing you were pursuing was not really in alignment with what you really needed. And so whether it was your fault or their fault, something caused that setback to happen. That setback is actually a blessing in disguise, and it's only going to put you closer to being more in touch with what you really want. And sometimes setbacks, you can just take another shot at doing the same exact thing that you didn't achieve. And if you want to do that, great. Now you can change your strategy a bit, figure out how you're going to do it. Just make sure it's still the right goal. And if it is, and it's the one you want to achieve, and you just want to do it again, well, then figure out what you can do this time that you can exercise control over that maybe you didn't exercise enough control over last time. So kind of like my other videos about how making active decisions will make you feel empowered because right or wrong, they allow you to feel like you're dictating your life a bit. Figuring out what you can do when you're facing a few steps back, a setback, will help you feel empowered because it's going to, again, help you feel like you're taking decisive actions and setting the pace for your life in a certain direction. And that's not going to make you feel like a passive victim of arbitrariness and cruelty. Okay. The last thing that I want to leave you with, there's actually 2 points. They're not really strategies. They're just some things to keep in mind. The first thing is, this video basically gave you 5 tips for how to be more resilient in any situation. A small setback, a big setback, and things you can do in the short term and in the long term. The first thing I wanted to just tell you was, again, there's really no way to measure who wins at life. There's no rubric, there's no scorecard, there's no pot of gold at the end of life's rainbow. There's just this existential experience that you went through and a sort of existential evaluation of it. At the end of your life, you need to be at peace with yourself and with how you performed. And I really think the more you learn how to have the comeback and how to get back on your feet when you fell off the horse, and it's like the line from Frank Sinatra, each time you fall flat on your face, can you pick yourself up and get back in the race? And that's going to build your inner love and your inner confidence and a really strong relationship that you'll have with yourself. And when you have that strong relationship with yourself and you know you can handle things well for yourself and that you can be a guiding light for other people you care about, and other people in the world, you're going to feel so at peace with whichever way life goes. And you're going to be proud of yourself for having gotten through everything that you got through. So building that skill of resilience is always, to me, far more telling of a person than how successful they are. I don't think when you find out how successful someone is, you have much data to understand them or to gauge them. Because someone who has a lot of success but hasn't faced a number of serious hindrances and setbacks, well, you know very little about them. You have no idea how they would do if they were born into entirely different circumstances. And someone who's faced serious hindrances. I have a friend who, her whole family was refugees from one country to another country to another country. And so seeing where she and her family have gotten from where they came from, to me, says so much more about her than just comparing her to someone else who's gotten to the same stage of life. It's without those hindrances, it says nothing about them. So resilience to me really is the measure of how strong a person's character is. And I think it's the muscle that when you build will help you have a very strong relationship with yourself, because you will know everything you went through to get to a certain point. And even if the rest of the world can't see it, even if people don't know the difference between you when you went to graduation day and one of your parents wasn't there because you had to lose them in a ghastly way, but you know what you went through. You know it in your heart when you're accepting that same diploma that other people are accepting, and they have no clue what you went through to get there, but you know it. So it affects your relationship with yourself, the most important relationship in your lifetime. So this was a little bit rambling, but I just wanted to reiterate that resilience is such an important skill, because it is the skill that helps you actually manage the obstacle course that is the crazy game of life. But it also is the mental skill that allows you to become a calm, peaceful person who can handle anything that comes your way without you unraveling and not being able to handle yourself with grace. Last but not least, even though I don't think that the different benchmarks that we have in society are telling of a lot of the things we think they tell. For example, I don't think someone's income really tells us how successful and intelligent they are. I don't think school always tells you how smart someone is. Getting a job doesn't mean that you're a better person or more disciplined or more capable than someone else. Everyone's got different attributes that they were born with, and they have different obligations in their lifetime, and they have different gifts they're meant to give to society. Not everyone is meant to solve the most complicated problems. Some people are just meant to spread love and to share good values and to be reliable friends. And we need every kind of person with every kind of attribute for the human race to prevail. So we have a lot of things that we often use as shortcuts for certain attributes. And I don't think a lot of those things actually tell you much about those attributes in the first place. I definitely don't think that your ability to get a particular financial reward, promotion, or job can tell how intelligent you are. Intelligence is impossible to measure. And of course, emotional intelligence, interpersonal skills, communication skills, empathy skills. There's so many skills that factor into intelligence that have nothing to do with just solving a problem or reciting facts. My point here is I don't want you to ever think that just because you didn't achieve a certain benchmark or goal and you instead had a setback, that you are somehow less than XYZ. There's no such thing. Truly, all human beings are entirely equal, and everyone was designed to be totally different, and that's okay. That's what makes us so special. And so it's not like there's any real measure of who's the smartest person in the world, but even if there were, we wouldn't need everyone to be the smartest person in the world. What we really need in the world is people who are kinder, and it's something I believe more and more with each passing year of my life. And a lot of times we set goals for ourselves when we're insecure and when we're young. I've said this in other videos, and we somehow can't shake off those insecurities. But real growth comes from realizing, so what if the thing that you were insecure about, so what even if it was true? What if you were insecure about not being super attractive? And even though attractiveness is subjective, so what if you're not the most attractive person in the world? That doesn't diminish your value as a human being. Your value is infinite, and you always have the power to give with what you have. And so what if you're not the smartest person in the world? Being the smartest person in the world doesn't ensure anything. It doesn't ensure that you're going to be able to make the world a better place. It doesn't ensure that you're going to be a good member of your family. It doesn't even ensure that you're going to be nice. And so even if a setback objectively means that there's something that you think you are lacking in, I also just want you to, when you are cool and calm, not when you're in the heat of the emotion, just say, well, so what if that's true? It probably isn't true. Like I said, a lot of benchmarks are arbitrary. But like, even if it was, so what? Does that mean like you don't deserve to be happy? Does that mean that you don't deserve to have a joyous life? Does that mean that you don't deserve love? Of course not. That's crazy. On that note, I encourage you all to work on building your resilience. Don't give up. Regroup, refresh, and get back to the game of life. Because there's always more to play. There's always moves to make. There's always changes to happen. And remember, resilience is a muscle. You build it slowly by just trying these different things out. It's not going to happen overnight. And with that, I'm going to leave this video here and wish you all the best. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next one. All right, take care. Bye.